Good morning, everyone. Folks who are joining, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat with your name, the district or organization that you're a part of, and where you are joining us from today. And we'll get started in just a moment. All right, as folks continue to join, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your school district or organization, and where you're joining us from today. So folks will continue to pop in, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, How to Pay for Your School's Solar System. My name is Lane Frazee, and I'm the coordinator for PHEND Sustainability, which is a co-organizer for this event, along with the Philadelphia Solar Energy Association. And this is our third webinar together. And our speakers today will be breaking down new and existing financing options for solar projects. So first, I want to thank again our partners who have supported us in our outreach for all three of our webinars, actually, the PA Solar Center, Generation 180, and the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. We're very grateful for their efforts in spreading the word to the statewide audience that we have. And like I said, this is our third webinar in a series on solar for schools. If you'd like to view the recordings for the first two webinars, I'm going to share them in the chat in a moment. And finally, before I turn it over to Liz Robinson to get us started, I'm going to just briefly go over a couple Zoom housekeeping items. So this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out at the end of next week. Please feel free to ask any questions or share in the chat during the presentation. And if you have a quick clarifying question about something one of the presenters said, please send it through the chat. And we have a few folks who will be looking out for questions and responding directly there. If your question requires a longer answer or is better suited for discussion, you can submit it through the chat or through the Q&A function, and a speaker will respond to it during our Q&A portion at the end. I'm looking forward to having a healthy Q&A portion for this one. I'm sure there will be many, many questions. So I will now hand it over to Liz Robinson, the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Solar Energy Association, who's going to introduce today's speakers and get us started. Liz.
Thank you, Lane. Thanks everybody for joining. This is part of the Solar Schools Toolkit project, which is funded by Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection. And we're hoping to release, we're on schedule to release the toolkit in very early July. And today's webinar is our final webinar. We are really excited to have this group of very, very knowledgeable presenters. Roger Clark is now retired, but retired as the director of the Sustainable Development Fund, which is part of the Reinvestment Fund in Philadelphia. Extremely knowledgeable attorney and finance, renewable energy and energy efficiency finance. Andrea Swiatocha is part of USDOE's schools and nonprofits team. Andrea is perfectly suited for her role, extremely well qualified, as she came from the Washington, D.C. school system in facilities management. So she has a real strong background in schools. And Andrea will have to leave us at 10 promptly. So we've changed the order of speaking so that she can meet her next obligation, which maybe she'll tell you about, is very exciting. Maryrose Myretus is the executive director of Philadelphia's Green Capital Corporation. The PGCC is essentially the Philly region's green bank. And Maryrose, again, is very experienced in lending in this space. The Philly Green Capital Corp is associated with the Philadelphia Energy Authority. Matthew Brown is a co-founder of and co-director of the National Energy Improvement Fund. He works very closely with someone many of you will know, Peter Kreisa, who many of us have worked with Peter over the years. So again, Matthew is extremely knowledgeable and experienced in finance for schools and all kinds of commercial entities, as well as residential financing. So we're thrilled to have this group today. And we're going to follow our toolkit process, which is a 10-step process to becoming a solar school. Today, we're focused on number 6, which is securing financing. And we've got a giant pile of things to cover, so we'll get right to it. And Roger, can you take it away?
Yes, hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. If you are using a power purchase agreement or a lease agreement, the solar developer is the one who needs to secure financing for the capital of your solar project. What this webinar is about is really the direct ownership option, where you yourself as a school district purchase, contract with, and build and own and operate your own solar PV system, what we call direct ownership. It's in that situation where you have to secure the financing to pay for your system. This slide simply talks about the different sources of capital that are out there, your own cash, the huge changes from the solar investment tax credit that were made by the Inflation Reduction Act, a series of grants that are coming, green banks, other nonprofit lenders, and then private lending. All of these are mechanisms that you can turn to get the capital you need for your solar project. I'm showing the arrows because we're going to take this slightly out of order as it's discussed in the toolkit and in this presentation, because Andrea needs to leave a little bit early. So that's the change in the order. Next. There we go. Andrea, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Liz and Roger, so much for the introductions. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrea Swiatocha. I'm with the U.S. Department of Energy on the Schools and Nonprofits team. Thank you for having me. So excited to be here to share what is really an amazing opportunity for our K-12 public schools. So hopefully some of you have heard, possibly even some of you submitted in our first round of grantees, but I want to share a really unique opportunity with you today that is for our K-12 public schools. So Liz, if we could go to the next. Made possible through President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, DOE received $500 million, and we received that in $100 million tranches over 5 years. So we received money starting in FY22 through 26. And that funds a number of things, one of which is renewables and solar, but it also includes many more things than just that. So you have the opportunity to request energy efficiency upgrades such as HVAC, lighting, controls. As I mentioned, it also includes renewable and also includes alternative fueled vehicle infrastructure purchase or lease. So this is really a first of its kind for the federal government to be investing in those infrastructure improvements. And my apologies if you can hear any background noise. It is an incredibly exciting day for us today, and why I have to depart early. We are making our public announcement here this afternoon. So I am sitting in a public school in the country supporting that. So We have kids in summer school moving about. So it is real, and it's a really exciting time for me to be a part of DOE. An eligible entities for this is a consortium. So it needs to be made up of that local education agency, often referred to as LEA, or that school district, as well as one or more schools, nonprofits, for-profits, or community partners. So the improvements do need to take place at a school, but we are looking for that consortium in order to be an eligible entity. And noted in the bill provision language and outlined here, there is a prioritization for the improvements to go to schools of high need, defined by schools that have a high free and reduced price lunch or are located in a rural locale. And we're also looking for folks to leverage private sector funding as well. So Liz, if we could go to the next slide. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the goals and the innovation of what we're looking for. This is a really exciting opportunity. And while we are excited to have the $500 million, we also know it's just a drop in the bucket, that we need more funding than that in our schools, not just for renewable, but for energy efficiency improvements. So we're hoping that this funding can really create some replicable and scalable impacts that you both could scale within your school district, as well as you see your counterparts in a nearby district, use that to sort of leverage and create ideas, looking to create innovative sustaining partnerships. I'd mentioned the leveraging funding, also looking for targeting those disadvantaged communities. And certainly, hopefully it's without said, but all of this has a significant impact of occupancy health. And if we didn't learn anything from COVID-19, hopefully that has become very clear to us, having been in a school district throughout those tough 2.5 years trying to get schools open. That was obviously an impactful moment, and I don't think will ever go away. And then also, what is the impact to student learning and growth? We're really looking for this opportunity to combine STEM and STEAM programming, use this as an opportunity, even if the improvements are, let's say, in an elementary school that might not have that CTE, which is often seen more at the high school level, that career and technical education. How do you get those younger students geared up and ready to go and take advantage of these learning from the improvements that take place in your schools? Liz, if we go to the next slide. Whoops. There we go. So just wanted to highlight, back on November 29th, we released our first, we refer to it as FOA, it's Funding Opportunity Announcement, the acronym that DOE uses. We announced approximately $80 million would be awarded in this first round, and ranging from $500,000 up to $15 million. I think most notably, it's also important to note the significantly reduced cost share. Cost share is typically a requirement in DOE, often around the 50%, but we know schools don't have that funding available to match. So I did want to highlight that it was only a 5% cost share, which we are really excited and hopefully reduce that burden for schools applying. We could go to the next slide. So within this FOA, we had 2 topic areas, and I'm going to emphasize topic area 2 for our discussion today, but topic area 1 included those energy efficiency and health improvements. Again, so trying to pair things like HVAC, lighting upgrades, controls. But topic area 2, if we go to the next slide, I think is most impactful for the conversation today around solar. So applicants could submit under this topic area, and we were looking for applicants to combine at least 2 of the bullets here in the middle. So either pairing energy efficiency and a renewable like solar, or pairing solar and alternative fueled vehicle, either that purchase or lease or infrastructure. So we saw, we had quite a demand. Just to give you a sense, we had over 1,000 concept papers that were submitted back in January. And I think that just is a testament to the need out there. And solar played a very big part of the submission, both in concept papers as well as in full applications that came in April. We go to the next slide. We can skip. I wanted to just take a minute to share just 2 other exciting things happening in our team and in DOE in general that are outside the grant. And then Lane will also put in the chat here at the end a link to our website. So I would encourage you to take a look at the website. You can sign up for more updates. I think most important to note that this was the first round of funding that went out, and we absolutely will have more rounds of funding. So if you didn't submit in this first, which actually Pennsylvania did a fantastic job of submitting, so I'm assuming some of you on the call did, you did not miss your only opportunity. We will be releasing and anticipate another round in spring of 2024, and would anticipate at least releasing at least 2 more rounds. But through part of this $500 million that we received, I just wanted to highlight the Energy Class Prize. We announced this back on May 5th, and we awarded $100,000 to 25 school districts or LEAs across the country. We learned and know through a lot of engagement that we've done over the last year that schools struggle from a staffing and overall capacity standpoint. So this funding was intended to fund a position or a half position. It's really up to the school how they decide to distribute it, but to support them with a year-long training through one-on-one and live webinar. And so we're excited to be kicking that off for school year 23-24 with those 25 school districts. And you can find more information, sort of follow us along over the course of the next year. Liz, if you want to jump to the next slide. Yeah, so just wanted to highlight sort of some stats on the 25 that will join us here in this first cohort. We had 18 that are located in disadvantaged communities. On an average across the 25, they have 73% free and reduced price lunch. We have a really great mix of small school districts up to the larger school districts, as well as a number of school districts. You can see 8 that fall in that rural category. And I'm not following the chat fully, but I did see one pop up, and this is the common question that we get quite a bit. Will we do this again? We want to make it through this first round to evaluate the success of it. We definitely want to continue to support both from a capacity building as well as learning and training. And so whether we do the exact same Energy Class Prize or whether we alter it, we are wanting to capitalize on this and provide it in another way. So stay tuned. Still a little bit to be determined, but we hope to be able to share this wonderful training out with a broader group beyond just the initial 25. So we go to the next slide. This just gives you a good map of where those 25 are located. So it's a really great spread across the country. If we go to the next slide, just wanted to share one final opportunity. If you go back one real quick, within DOE, we have the Efficient and Healthy Schools campaign. This is free and available to all K-12 public schools. So the campaign aims to improve energy performance, reduce carbon emission, and promote a healthy learning environment in schools. This is a partnership while DOE leads it in partnership with U.S. Department of Education, as well as our partners at EPA. And this provides free technical assistance to school districts. So if you go to the next page and slide, we'll explain a little more. So you simply just need to sign up. Again, while it doesn't provide funding to you to implement the projects, it is a free technical assistance program, and they're fantastic partners. I work very closely with them. They can support you if you're looking, to consider IAQ monitoring, considering some projects, want to think about the best way to implement that. They're there to support. And we also have one of our labs, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, which is one of the 17 labs at DOE, as well as NBI, on board to support that technical assistance. So if you go to one more slide, Liz. I just wanted to share some other tailored resources that we have both on the campaign and just in general at DOE. So hopefully you all find these helpful. Again, not necessarily all specific to solar, but just wanted to share that in general because I do find them helpful for our schools. So my last and final slide, and I believe Lane has already put these in the chat, was just providing the links. So the best place in order to stay updated on our funding opportunity is to go to the Renew America Schools website. If you click on that, I would recommend signing up for updates. We'll use that list distribution to notify when we anticipate and really narrow down on that date for the next round of funding. And then wanted to provide the link here as an opportunity to join the Efficient and Healthy Schools campaign. In this case, you would be, as a school district, a participant, but there's also an opportunity if we have non-school districts on this call to also join as a supporter. And we're always looking for that as well. So with that, I just want to quickly introduce, I have my colleague, Annabelle Swift. She is on the Schools and Nonprofits team with me as well. She will be staying on the call so she can answer any questions if they do come up at the end, but very happy I could join at least briefly. And it's really an exciting time for schools across the country.
Andrea, thank you very much. And I'm glad that we got you out by your 10 o'clock deadline. So good luck with the rest of your day. All right, Liz, let's get the next slide. Okay, let's go back to our order of sources of capital, and the first is your own cash, especially early in the project. It doesn't make sense to try to secure financing for some of the very preliminary expenses you might have as you're developing your solar project. Pennsylvania public schools follow a chart of accounts for reporting their financial data. And there are two categories that are relevant that you should be asking and talking with your CFO, your chief financial officer at your school district about. Code 0793, capital restricted for capital projects. How much money is set aside for that? If that's a large number, maybe there's some dollars you might tap to help with your solar project. And code 0850, the unassigned fund balance. Again, how many dollars are in that account, and is there capital there that you might be able to access? But talk with your CFO, that's important. Second issue, and this is the big one, the solar investment tax credit's been around for a long time, but it has been changed dramatically by the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm going to be including a lot of detail in these slides, but in the presentation, just touching on them. But go back and review it. There's a lot of information to distill, and I wanted to do that as faithfully as I could, but it meant a lot of words. It also means relatively few photographs or images. What do you do? Show piles of cash all the time? But anyway, financing is that kind of a topic. Okay, one of the most fundamental changes is that the IRA made the ITC applicable to tax-exempt entities. If you did not pay federal income tax, a federal tax credit doesn't help you. But now with IRA, you can have what are called elective payments. Used to be called direct payments in the early guidelines, but it's an elective payment. It's if you get a tax refund from the IRS equal to the amount of the tax credit that you're entitled to under the ITC. The base level of credit also was raised. It had been 30%, but was beginning to decline. It's now been pushed up to 30%. And even more important, there are numerous adders, additional provisions that maybe increase that percentage from 30 to 40 or 50 or 60% even if you qualify for those various adders. And I'll go through those briefly. The 30% base credit. If you have a system that's less than 1 megawatt AC, you're fine. The project automatically complies. But if your project is 1 megawatt AC or larger, you must satisfy both federal Davis-Bacon Act prevailing wage and some apprenticeship requirements. Next. So federal Davis-Bacon Act, that's a little different than the Pennsylvania Prevailing Wage Act, which school districts already need to do for their building projects. In some cases, the federal level may actually be a little lower than the state level because of how they draw the geographic boundaries of the area where they're gathering the wage information. And the federal will preempt the state level. So that's something to look at. In addition to prevailing wage, there's some new apprenticeship requirements, again, trying to expand the equity of solar by developing a diverse workforce, getting people involved in the construction of solar projects. So there's certain percentages that now have to be required, and ratios between apprentices and journeymen and all of that. So what you need to do is just make sure that your contractor is aware of that and complying with that, because if you don't, next slide, what happens is you can have your percentage reduction reduced. If you do not pay prevailing wages or do not satisfy the apprenticeship requirements, instead of a 30% credit, you only could qualify for a 6% credit. Another little situation of give with one hand, take back with another. For portion of your project that's financed with tax exempt financing. For example, if you have a school bond that you're using a portion of to pay for a solar project, that's generally tax exempt. Instead of a 30% credit for that portion, you only can claim a 10% credit. Now, if half your project is tax exempt financing, the rest is not, then it's not 10% overall. It's 10% only on the portion financed by tax exempt financing. Next. Here's some key links that you can, at your leisure, come back to. That first one, the Clean Energy Updates page from the White House, is something I've been relying on, because every new set of guidelines, every new proposed regulation for all aspects of IRA get posted there. So it's a good place to go to find what's the latest. Has something dropped that I need to know about? Next. Okay, I mentioned there's several adders, and the first adder is a 10% adder if you're using domestic content for your solar project. And domestic content has two elements to it. Any iron or steel in the project for the racking systems and so on must be US produced steel or iron. That's fairly straightforward, and I think many public sector projects now require that. So that's not the issue. The issue may be the second one, which is the requirement that 40% of the total cost of all manufactured products, meaning the solar modules, the inverters, any other interconnection equipment, the 40% of the cost of that must be from materials produced in the US. Next. Here's kind of the rub. If you do not meet the 30% tax credit level, i.e. if you fail to pay prevailing wages, the 10% adder also gets reduced. It gets reduced down to 2%. So again, there's sort of a double hit if you're not satisfying the full 30% level. The percentage of domestic content required in the manufactured products is now 40, but it's going to be increasing to 55% in 2027. So the bar will get raised over time. But the third point I want to mention here is this seems to be quite a hurdle right now. Getting manufacturers to disclose how much of their solar module price comes from off-country materials, how much of it is domestic, it kind of requires them to disclose a little more information that the industry might be interested in doing. So they've proposed some comments of alternative ways to comply with this. So I think the issue of how you satisfy domestic contents to be determined. That's something that's still very much up in the air. But follow that. Look at that link. Here's the link of the guidance from the IRS Notice 2023-39. So you can see what the current thinking is. This is undoubtedly going to get updated in the future. Next. There's a second adder for what they call energy communities. And these are communities that had been part of the fossil fuel history, coal mines or coal power plants that are now closed, and areas that have been tied to fossil fuels and are suffering above normal unemployment. There's a third category of brownfield sites. Notice the first two are broader geographically. It's the full census tract or the full metropolitan statistical area. The brownfield site is limited to just the brownfield site itself, not the census tract in which there's a brownfield site located. So that's one area. But energy communities are a huge part of Pennsylvania. This is from a map online from the National Energy Technology Lab. There'll be a link in the next slide showing areas that qualify for that 10% adder for the energy community. You can see with a coal closure or a coal mine, and then the MSAs and so on. Brownfields aren't shown on this map, but I have a link in the link page for the DEP site of the 1,200 or so brownfields in Pennsylvania. Next. So here's some key links of the IRS notice that an ETL map and the DEP site of 1,091 brownfield sites. Next. The third adder I want to address is the adder for low-income communities. But unlike the others, this is a competitive adder. The others, if you qualify, you get it. This one, you have to qualify and you have to apply and be selected through a competitive process, because the IRS is going to be awarding 700 megawatts of projects in low-income communities in 2023 and 700 again in 2024. We don't have that application yet. It's likely to take place in the latter part of 2023. Next slide. The teal section are those areas in Pennsylvania that meet the census tracts that meet these low-income qualifications. So you can see, again, this is a fairly large portion of the state. So for those school districts that are in this area, and there's a link to this map, and you can literally zoom down to the census tract, you are eligible to apply for this. And this is the one area where it's kind of hurry up, because we recommend that if you have a project that you're working to develop, applying for either that 2023 or 2024 award of this 10% adder is something that you'll need to be ready to do fairly soon. So if you're in one of these communities, this is something that would be worth going after, because again, it will reduce the cost of your project to you by an additional 10%. Next. Again, here's some of the key links of the proposed rulemaking, and then that low-income communities map. Next. Okay. The IRS guidance on what the process is to claim this elective payment just was published a couple of weeks ago. It's about 120 pages. But as I said earlier, it's treated as an overpayment of your taxes. So what that means is you need to understand what is your school district's tax year, what is the income, or what is the tax form that it files, and most school districts file the federal 990 form, and when is that tax return due each year. The 990s are due May 15th of the following year. And so those are important dates and facts to understand, because that determines when your filing needs to happen. IRS is creating a pre-filing registration process. It will be online through an electronic portal. Before you file your tax return, you need to register your project, and that it requires specific information about who you are, your tax status, what credit you're claiming, the federal investment tax credit for solar, and then information about the project. When's it going to start construction? When will be placed in service, and other information. That's all part of, will be part, because we don't have that portal yet set up, will be part of that process that you'll need to complete to get your registration. Then IRS will send you a registration number, and that you need to show on your tax return. Each project, I mentioned here in the first line of number 2, each project needs to be registered separately. So if your school district is doing multiple schools, each of those is treated as a separate project and will need to be registered. Then after you have all that, you complete your construction and place your project in service. Next. And then you make your elective payment for the tax year during which the project was completed and placed in service. So for example, if you start your project in in December of 2023. It comes online in May of 2024. It's that 2024 tax year, if you're on the calendar year, that you need to file for this in your 2024 return, which is due May 15th, 2025. So that's sort of the timing of all of this. After the IRS receives your return, the IRS will audit, or not audit, will review that return, process it, and then issue a check to you or electronic payment to you equal to the amount of the federal investment tax credit that you would have qualified for. It's important to note that IRS can be auditing all of these claims, and if you receive a credit more than you were qualified for example, if it turns out you didn't pay the prevailing wage, or comply with apprenticeship, or your domestic content was found not to meet that 40% standard, or whatever the hiccup was, IRS can require whatever that overpayment was must be returned to them, plus a penalty equal to 20% of that excess payment. So there's a bit of teeth to this if you're not quite following the rules. Next. Here the proposed regulations. Again, this is proposed. There are hearings coming in August. Written comments are now being accepted by the IRS, and following all of that, they'll be issuing final regulations sometime in the fall. So keep posted. Okay, let's go back then to that overall checklist of sources of capital, and the big one was grants that I want to talk about next. Andrea started with the Renew America Schools grant program, which is significant, $500 million. So pay attention to that one. The first one I want to talk about is the Act 129 grants for commercial solar projects from your local utility company. As Act 129 is the state law that requires our electric utilities to assist customers with energy conservation measures when those energy savings are cheaper than the cost of generating electricity. And so they're multi-million-dollar budgets each year for all of that, and rebates that get paid. The utilities have recently been adding solar projects for commercial customers to that list of measures. PECO has a program that will pay you 10 cents per kilowatt hour for your solar project generation that you use on site. So if your on-site consumption of electricity is greater than your on-site solar generation, all of that generation gets counted, and they'll pay that 10 cents for however much your system generates in its first year. After that, it stops. So that's a significant payment that you don't want to leave on the table. Others are a little less generous. Duquesne is 5 cents. First Energy, with all of its family of MedEd, Penelec, Penn Power, and West Penn, pays 3 cents, and PP&L pays 3 cents as well. But again, money you don't want to leave on the table. Other possible grants, both the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act have multiple provisions for providing incentives and other assistance for clean energy. And that's really in the process of being designed right now. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is looking at all of these opportunities and deciding, do we want to reinvigorate our Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority, our Commonwealth Financing Authority's solar grant program, or these other mechanisms that the Commonwealth has used in the past, or is there some other way of deploying these dollars? So stay tuned for all of that. Another exciting development, Representative Elizabeth Fiedler has introduced House Bill 1032, the Solar for Schools grant program bill that pays hefty grants, or proposes to pay hefty grants for school solar projects. Will to be determined if that makes it into the governor's budget and through the General Assembly, and at what level. But again, there's things in the works for other grants. Next. Okay, let's go on then to the next topic, which is green banks and other lenders. Get all the grant money you can, but at some point there's going to be probably a balance that you will need to finance. So, Maryrose.
Great. Thank you so much, Roger, for the introduction and the information so far. Hi, everybody. My name is Maryrose Myretus. I am the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Green Capital Corp. We are the Green Bank affiliate of the Philadelphia Energy Authority, who some of you may be familiar with from their work on Solarize and CPACE. And we're really the Green Bank of Philadelphia and the broader region. So right now we touch Bucks, Montgomery, Chester, and Delaware counties as well. But I'm not here today just to talk about Philadelphia. I'd also like to mention a statewide entity, the Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority, that Roger actually just mentioned as well, which is a public financing authority that has the opportunity that can serve as a statewide green bank as well. So I'll be speaking about the perspective of green banks across the state and how they can be supporting solar on schools like yours. Before I get into it, I just want to tell you a little bit more about what green banks are. So green banks are mission-driven organizations that use innovative financing to accelerate the transition to clean energy and fight climate change. Green banks are not really traditional banks. They're not depository institutions with checking and savings accounts. We really work to fill gaps in local clean energy economies and find ways to crowd in capital from public, private, and philanthropic sources to bring projects to fruition and grow the clean energy economy in an inclusive and equitable way. The Green Bank of Philadelphia, we work to really support clean energy projects across multiple sectors, including residential, commercial, and institutional projects. We work with developers, nonprofits, multifamily buildings, and single-family residential homes to bring money to climate-related projects across the city. So I think next I'm going to get into how green banks really do. Oh, I'm sorry, Liz, would you mind going back one slide? Just how green banks really work and the mechanisms that we use to help crowd in capital and use this innovative financing approach. So what we do is really, try to identify market gaps and figure out what is missing from a capital stack or what's missing from the market that would enable a project to come to fruition. So sometimes that means providing new financial products like subordinated debt or loan loss reserves or other sorts of credit enhancements. Sometimes that means something even more creative. We do something called an SREC revolving fund here in the Philadelphia area to help support low-income solar coming online by providing financial support through SREC purchases. So there are a variety of different ways that green banks can work to empower businesses, developers, and residents to build a clean energy future. Okay, next slide. Nationally, there are over 24 green banks and growing, and the green bank community is really large and thriving. There's one of the key concepts that green banks really work to do is to crowd in capital, as I mentioned before. And this mobilization ratio here of the 3.54x really speaks to that. So what that says is that for every dollar invested by a green bank, on average nationwide, it creates $3.54 of overall investment in the clean energy economy. So that's a really capital efficient way to use green bank dollars to create more investment in this space. And you can see that the space has been growing when you look at the chart on the right-hand side of the page. Both PGCC and the Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority draw on best practices from the green banks that came before us as we're implementing programs and thinking about what's coming here in Pennsylvania. You can see that 2022 was really like a banner year for the green bank community. And that all happened before the Inflation Reduction Act funding really hit the streets. So the Inflation Reduction Act and specific provisions that support green banks is what I'm going to talk about next. The Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, includes almost $370 billion of federal climate-related funding. It has a focus on equity and has a specific provision of $27 billion in what's called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Next slide. And the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund has specific call outs to support schools, which I'll talk about on the next slide as well. The thing that's noteworthy about the IRA is that a lot of the funding comes in the form of tax credits, like Roger was just talking about, rebates, like he was just talking about, but then also broader grant funding that would create something like the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. There are 3 pots of funding in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that can go to state and local green banks like PETA or PGCC or other organizations and those 3 pots all support solar growth in different ways. I think that the 2 most relevant to this community are the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator and the National Clean Investment Fund, both of which have the opportunity to scale and support solar access and affordability across sectors. And the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator specifically calls out schools as a possible beneficiary and an intended beneficiary. The summary here is really that all of the funding available in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund works to make solar more affordable and accessible across sectors, which ultimately should be driving down the price of the projects that you might be looking at for your schools. And all of this creates capital opportunities for organizations like ours and PETA that can support the work that you're doing. Next slide. So Roger talked about sources of capital and you know, he said, you've got rebates, you've got grants, you've got tax credits, but eventually you kind of run out and you may have to look at debt financing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then Matthew from NEIF, who's speaking next, will get into that a bit more. What I wanted to do here is really talk to you about some key levers to keep in mind when you're looking at the debt financing for a solar array for your school, if you're going the direct ownership route that Roger talked about earlier. So if you're installing solar on your school, the way that you finance it can really affect the savings that you achieve on an annual basis. This matters because one of the reasons that solar for schools is getting so much traction nationwide is because the solar arrays are saving so much money on their electricity bills and then creating cash through the sale of SRECs, that the savings are able to cover additional school expenses. So installing solar not only helps with the green footprint, but also helps with the cash flow position of the school. To optimize the cash flow position that you get out of your solar project, you'll want to think about how to optimize your debt financing. And the number one thing that you can do is really look at the term length. So what I have here is a graph that just demonstrates directionally the different cash flow positions on an annual basis based on debt that has the same DSCR, debt service coverage ratio, the same interest rate, same amount financed, but just has different terms. So what you can see here is in the dark blue line, that's a 10-year term, and the cash flow at the beginning, the first 10 years of the project is pretty low. And that's because a lot of the savings are being used to pay for the debt, which is fine. It's still cash flow positive. And then it really spikes up and you have a lot more cash on hand from the project later on in the project. The green line shows a 15-year term where you see that spike really happens at year 15 when the debt's paid off. And the light blue line shows a 20-year term where you don't have that spike because you're paying off the debt service for all 20 years, but you have higher cash flow available to you in the early years in particular to help you fund other projects in your school. I just showed a graph here with 20 years, but you know, solar does have a longer useful life in the 25 to 30 year range. So once the financing runs out, all 3 of these would be showing the same amount in that 20 plus year space. Next slide. So I wanted to just keep this short and sweet today, but please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about green banks and the financing that we expect to be available through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and the way that we can be supporting your solar school projects. Thanks.
Thank you, Maryrose. I just want to let everyone know that one of the deliverables of the Solar on Schools project is going to be a pro forma, an economic financial model that in Excel format that you can use to evaluate what those possible savings of your project may be. It has a bunch of assumptions that you can tweak, and it's a way of sort of early on projecting what the financial savings of your project is, because that's the bottom line. Everyone wants to know, how much will this cost us? How much will it save us? And it's a way of testing, what if the electric utility rates don't rise at 4% like this developer is suggesting, but some different model. So look for that Excel spreadsheet pro forma, and Maryrose has been very helpful with us in developing that. As she said, and as we've said, despite how rich IRA and IIJA have been, there's only limited amounts of public dollars available. And what is needed is bringing in private capital as well to really bring solar at scale. And so Matthew will tell us about the perspective of a private lender about solar projects, especially on schools. Thank you, Matthew.
Well, good morning, everybody. Let's move right along to the next slide. I'm very happy to be here. A National Energy Improvement Fund is an Allentown-based organization that was founded about 2017, 2018, but we actually date back to for many years. Actually, this is 1947, long before I was actually born. We were my business partner, Peter Kreisa, who some of you may know, was his family business was a company called AFC First, which ran the Keystone Health program for many years that some of you may be familiar with. And over the years, we've done some $800–900 million through a combination of Peter's original AFC First Corporation and my prior company, which focused on commercial financing. So we have created a National Energy Improvement Fund as a lender focused on energy efficiency, solar energy, renewable energy, and electrification. So we are a very focused lender in this space. We tend to do a great deal of work with programs, whether that be utilities, where a utility might buy down an interest rate, that kind of thing, or if it's with a state or with a foundation. So, for instance, we've had a solar loan program working with the Sustainable Energy Fund, which we've actually run through all the first tranche of capital with that, and we're relaunching that in the next actually very shortly. So we're very active in Pennsylvania. But we are a national company. I actually happen to be talking to you from Colorado. So, but we're a national company. We work commercially, nationally, and then residentially. But as I say, we are a lender, and so I kind of bring that private lending perspective here to you. Let's move to the next slide. And so, what I wanted to do is just a very few minutes give you a sense of a couple of these financing options, kind of typical financing options that schools would use. A bit of a wrinkle here, which we are honestly still figuring out what effect this would have, but I'm going to bring this up in a couple of the slides, and it kind of sits in the background. Roger had mentioned the adjustment to what used to be called the direct pay amount, and I apologize, Roger, you'd given out the new name for it. It's no longer called direct pay.
Elective payment.
Elective payment, yes. So there's an adjustment to that elective payment, which comes if one is using tax-exempt financing for the solar project. And so I think it adds a wrinkle. I think we'll have to kind of figure that out. So I'll kind of refer to that a couple of times. So, but basically, they're really in this world, there are really two types of financing. One is what we call the tax-exempt lease purchase, and that is a standard tax-exempt financing type of structure. The interesting thing about it is that it is debt. So it is certainly a debt product. But the interesting thing is that because of the way it's structured, it is reauthorized every year. And so what that means is that every single year, there is, in theory, the opportunity for the borrower to essentially say, no, we're not paying this debt. Now, of course, the implication of saying you're not paying that debt and essentially saying, okay, we're going to kind of just walk away is not good for long-term credit, but nonetheless, in the way it's structured, because it is essentially viewed as single year, 1 year debt or short-term debt, does not count against the typical long-term debt caps that you see with many school districts or local governments. So it's a pretty standard, very common type of tax-exempt financing. One of the reasons that people use tax-exempt financing is that those rates tend to be about 20% lower than your typical commercial rates. So this becomes that, this kind of creates that kind of dynamic where we would have to think, okay, do you use that tax exempt rate and then have a lower elective payment amount, right? Or do you have a commercial kind of much more unusual type of thing, commercial kind of taxable financing rate, right? A higher rate, but then have the the full direct pay amount. So I honestly would have to, I have not done that analysis to kind of see where that would come out, but I think it adds kind of an interesting wrinkle. But those are really the two types of things. Maryrose mentioned the advantage of having long-term financing, and certainly, with any financing that we typically see in this space, you can, especially for larger projects above $1 million or a couple $1 million, you can generally get to 20-year financing. Shorter or smaller dollar amounts, you'd be more at that 15-year amount. So the finance product, again, typically, very often you'll see, especially for larger projects up to 20 years, the way that it typically works is that funds one agrees to that financing agreement on a certain amount. You've got a $5 million in financed amount. That $5 million is funded into an escrow account. The payments begin at the point that those payments, that account is funded. And essentially what happens is there are draws made on that escrow account with the consent and actually at the request of the borrower to pay down any obligations to the two contractors, to subs and so on and so forth. So it becomes, instead of having a construction loan and then a takeout with a separate permanent loan, essentially in this type of financing, it generally works as kind of both, right? So you create that escrow account and then those payments come out of that, and then that the actual payments begin at the time of that loan funding into that account. We can move to the next thing. So what does that mean that we would typically look at? We're going to be looking at the financials for that borrower entity. Typically with a school district, that's not a problem. In other words, they're generally publicly available. I do see sometimes there are cases where it's a smaller school district, maybe it hasn't taken out any debt, maybe there's no rating for that particular district because it's a school or because it's a smaller school district. So that requires a little bit more data, but generally that's in most cases credit is very, very good with public schools and school districts. Tends not to be a big issue, and we can figure that out pretty quickly. We need to know the project equipment that's being installed, right? So the panel type, the inverters, the size, the output, degradation assumptions, and then we need to know who is actually doing that information, or excuse me, doing that installation. So we need to know licensing, history of that contractor. So what are we going to look at? We're going to look at the borrower credit quality, right? Again, as I mentioned before, typically the credit quality for schools is good. We've seen cases where maybe there's a situation of declining enrollments that sometimes can pose an issue. We have seen some cases, maybe not so much in Pennsylvania, but where local governments and often the schools have had credit issues, bankruptcy, that kind of thing. Very unusual, but that's obviously a concern. And again, the question, in some cases, that credit quality, the data may not be as available. So in that case, we need to do a little bit more digging. As far as the contractor goes, we need to know, does the contractor have experience in installing solar? In other words, simply a contractor with an electrical license typically is not going to be somebody that we're going to want to be engaged in a project where that project really has to be producing energy for 20, 25, 30 years, right? Contractor obviously needs proper licensing. We do pull credit on the contractors, look for liens, tax liens, other liens, bankruptcy, and that kind of thing. So it's a we do look for information about the contractor. Move to the next slide. Project information, fairly standard, but we do want to know what is actually being installed by that installer, right? So is it are the panels by a no-name installer? Is the inverter a no-name inverter that doesn't have proper that doesn't have good history? Are the warranties the kind of standard warranties we would expect to see? We'd also look at the pro formas for that project, equipment efficiencies, degradation, reasonableness of that degradation. If we see degradation rates of 0.1% or something, we're gonna want to adjust that in a pro forma. So fairly standard kinds of things. The last thing really is the I guess kind of thoughts in general. I think the funding is available for long terms, but I think we need to understand better the implication of that reduced elective payment amounts. So that's going to be an important consideration in whether to use that taxable versus tax exempt financing. The other piece, and I think somebody mentioned, we do offer a product where we can help, where it may take a year and a half to get that actual direct payment or elective payment. We can provide essentially bridge capital related to that particular bridge payment, so that because that is an issue that a lot of school districts are going to have. So here's my contact information. I'm happy to move on to questions right here.
Good, thank you, Matthew. Before we get into the Q&A section, let me just sort of tie up a bow around some issues that came up in the second webinar about contracting and procurement. And I have a confession to make. When we began this project, we thought, wow, IRA, tax exempt elective payments to tax exempt entities like schools, that's going to change the world. The PPA will be a thing of the past because everyone will want to get all of the savings for themselves and not have to share it with a third party. Maybe, but maybe not. I think there are reasons to really look at PPAs as still a viable entity. Direct ownership for some schools feels like a big unnecessary risk, especially given all the challenges schools are facing these days. Pennsylvania law also limits how much debt a school district can take on, even for a project that can have a positive payback like solar. There are caps, and a school may be reluctant, or a district may be reluctant to take on debt if they see some other capital needs on the near-term horizon that they want to save their borrowing capacity for. And then finally, Pennsylvania law, such as the 1913 Separations Act, the Pennsylvania Procurement Code, and the Pennsylvania School Code, all make procuring solar projects for school districts pretty complicated. Next slide. I think some solutions are feasible for that if you want to go the direct ownership route. But I have to confess, I don't feel like I've really solved this conundrum yet. I've talked to different people, and some say, for example, under that first bullet, oh, you just select your solar contractor, they can do system design because schools under the Separations Act can do do professional services, and then you ask your contractor to separately bid out the electrical and the general construction parts. And so not a big barrier, a number of extra RFPs, but certainly feasible. Other school districts I've spoken to and other experts I've spoken to is, oh no, use the Pennsylvania Guaranteed Energy Savings Act, GESA, because under the terms of the GESA statute, that's seen as an alternative procurement approach. So in essence, GESA exists alongside of the Separations Act and its issues, but GESA allows you to have a single bid, a single point of responsibility, a single prime contractor. But in order to qualify for GESA, you've got to go through some additional steps. There are rules about the RFPs. There's rules about proposals. You have to deal with what's called a qualified provider. Now, the Department of General Services has a list of their qualified providers, various energy service companies or ESCOs, but school districts do not have to use that list. That's for Commonwealth agencies. School districts are able, under the statute, to determine who they want to use as a qualified provider. What GESA does do is require a payback period and other price guarantee or other savings guarantees. So you need to follow those hoops. That said, I think it's critical. Work with your chief financial officer to understand your school district's capacity to take on additional debt. Do that before you go too far down this road. Is there any openness to financing a solar project? And then next, work with your school district solicitor to understand how they interpret the Separations Act and the Procurement Code and the School Code to make sure that the process that you are thinking about is one that they will not choke over and that they'll give you a green light for that. And then the final recommendation here is, and this is an important one, we think at these days, it's important to just request both a price for under a PPA structure and a price under a direct ownership structure in your RFP, so that you can compare those and see. There are benefits of the PPA, there are benefits of direct ownership, but unless you get the pricing bids, you really won't be able to quantify those differences, and so doing that would be important. That's our presentation for today. I thank you for all your attention, and we have about a half hour for questions and discussion. So let me throw the mic back to Lane.
All right, thanks everyone. So we did get a couple questions in the chat. Folks, if you want to jump in with more questions, please feel free to do so. I actually have a question for Matthew that it was sent directly to me, but I'm just gonna send it in the chat so you can take a look at it, Matthew. Let me know if you can see it.
There are many things in the chat. Let me just get to the bottom. How does USDOE, the LPO, work with private financing? Okay. That's a very big question. So, okay, so just, question is, how does USDOE Loan Programs Office, or LPO, work with private financing, 30-year government debt, question mark. And so that's a big, it's a big question. In general, the Loan Programs Office has been undergoing a lot of changes in the way that that they are interacting with private markets for financing and supporting projects. It used to be that they were really much more kind of project focused and providing capital to certain companies or certain large projects. They are now looking at providing capital to in ways that can support programs and specifically programs that are that have state involvement. So they've developed a new category of support if there is state support for a project. Now, this is the kind of thing that I suspect we will see the state of Pennsylvania supporting solar projects in ways that that would qualify for them for that additional LPO support. That said, I think my impression, and it's really something that LPO would have to answer, but my impression after some pretty extensive discussions with them is that there would be a lot of openness on their part to kind of talking about specific ways to support these this type of programmatic approach. So that's but I think I'm not expert on LPO specifically. I've had a lot of discussions with them, but maybe Annabelle from DOE might have some additional thoughts as well.
I think that's a pretty good response, and I can put in some contact information for folks at LPO, but I do not directly have knowledge on that.
Yeah, okay. I know that they're interested, put it that way. I know that they're interested. We've had they actually have been coming to us for additional kind of follow-up. So that's a good sign.
Great, thank you. So we did get a couple questions that were more so related to weatherization and other energy efficiency upgrades. So I wanted to pause on those for a moment to open up space for anyone who has questions about financing for solar projects. So I know it was a lot of information, so we just want to give a little pause if folks need to gather their thoughts.
Lane, let's just go ahead with the other questions.
I actually see something in the chat. Can PGCC explore cash flow slide? So Maryrose, I
Sure.
think that would be for you.
Liz, would you mind going back one slide? Perfect, thanks. Mark, I think I'm going to guess that you mean kind of explain what the graph here is saying, but please feel free to chime in and clarify if you have a more specific question. But the picture that I'm trying to paint here with this graph is to show you basically that the term length of your financing, whether you take out 10-year debt, 15-year debt, or 20-year debt, really helps shape the cash savings that you're able to generate from your solar project, which you can then use for other purposes within your school. And so what this is showing here is this dark blue line is the 10-year debt. And since it's a shorter term, it means you are packing more debt service payments into a shorter amount of time, which means higher payments per year, which means that when you take your savings and you back out your debt service in that 10-year period, you don't have as much cash savings on hand to use for other purposes. As you stretch out the term of your debt financing to 15 or 20 years, the amount of debt service per year goes down, which means that you're able to retain more of the savings from your project each year. And so that's what you see here with the green line, which is the 15 years, and then the light blue line, which is 20 years of the savings from the project minus the debt service equals the cash that you have available for other purposes. If you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I hope that helps.
I might just add a bit of perspective because I think, Maryrose, I like this graphic. It kind of allows you to think a little bit about how you might, what are your goals, right? And one thing we see in a lot of municipal projects is that people will, in some cases, they try to extend that payment term out as long as possible and frankly try to get some other kinds of other projects kind of in there. I mean, everything ultimately needs to be energy related, but it gives you that flexibility. I think Maryrose mentioned that it gives you that flexibility to make other investments because it's flowing up. It's freeing up cash flow. Very frequently when people are not doing that, we what we often see is people trying to keep that term as short as possible, and still have that cash flow, monthly or yearly cash flow, but really trying to keep it as short as possible. So it's it gives you flexibility.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's such a trade-off between near-term, like annual cash savings or the total amount of debt service that you pay over the period. I think maybe we can go to the next question unless Mark has more.
Yes, so I'll go ahead and read the next question that came through in the chat. So it says, you mentioned the 30% tax elective payment drops to 10% of the financing is from tax exempt bonds. How is it calculated if a nonprofit has both tax exempt and non-tax exempt financing already in place? And then in parentheses, PA municipality and not school, if that matters. So they're asking on behalf of a Pennsylvania municipality.
First, it does not matter if you have tax exempt financing on that portion of your project that you're using tax exempt financing for. Your credit percentage is 10%, but on the balance of the project, if you're using taxable debt or grants from the state or other sources of capital, your own money, all of that is still at the 30% rate. So it's a blended percentage that you would be able to claim. It's not 10% on the entire project if you have $1 of tax exempt financing in it. It's just 10% on that portion it's tax exempt and 30% on everything else.
I might just add, I think I wanted to clarify. It looks to me like the question is also asking if we currently have a mix of tax exempt and taxable financing in place, how does that affect things? And I think what Roger's saying is it's really related to the project that is being installed,
correct.
Not your current financing mix.
Right.
Yeah,
it's about in economic terms, it's calculating the basis of the project and what are the dollars that the project itself is, and it's not all your other operating expenses and your other budget. It's simply the project itself.
All right, great. And then a question about the sample RFP. And if it's ready yet, I will let Roger take that.
That will be published when we publish the toolkit and when we publish the pro forma. All three of those deliverables will come live at the same time. We are making final tweaks to the RFP, getting some comments on it, and that will be published in early July, as Liz said, along with the toolkit and the pro forma.
Great. And then we have a question from a student as well. And I just wanted to highlight, we got some great responses from participants in the chat to that. So thank you all for jumping in and providing resources. But I just wanted to highlight, it says, I'm a student involved in the environmental club in my high school. Do you have any advice for trying to collaborate with teachers and maybe administrators to try to implement a solar project? And we had a couple folks in the chat who sent over for consideration Eco Schools from the National Wildlife Federation, which is a great program, tons of resources there, as well as Generation 180 with the Solar for All Schools resources. So I would second both of those, definitely check those out. If anyone else has other advice though, please feel free to jump in.
I'm kind of a numbers geek, and so I think a good place to start is to educate yourselves about what is the environmental footprint of our school. These sites have information about how you go about doing that, but essentially it's what are all of the inputs? How much electricity are we using? How much natural gas? How much fuel oil? how much, and then what is our waste and solid waste and so on, just to get a sense of what's our environmental or carbon footprint. Electricity is huge in terms of how that contributes to our environmental issues. But being able to quantify that, getting the utility bills and doing a little bit of math to see how much that all is, I think that's a good place to start. Then you can say, okay, well, if that's, and we go through this in the toolkit, the step, evaluate your energy use, and then here's some rules of thumb for figuring out where might solar go in our property, on our buildings, or on the grounds. What's the capacity of that solar likely to be? How much of that electric use could we offset with a solar project? All of those are covered in how to go through that in the toolkit. So I think that's a good place to start, just trying to get a handle on what kind of impact might a solar project have on your school's environmental footprint.
Related to that, I wanted to mention that as we've gone on in this process, many schools in Pennsylvania are really interested in decarbonizing their entire school. And it seems to me, and this is really a question for Annabelle, is the Renew America or Renew American Schools grant program open to not just energy efficiency, but decarbonization measures?
Yeah, that's a great question. Applications were judged on various criteria, which included sort of broadly defined energy savings and energy cost savings, as well as health benefits. So under the eligible uses beyond just efficiency, there were specific electrification measures, as well as renewables, EV charging. So we weren't just looking at, energy savings as in energy efficiency, bringing down your energy use, but also the overall impact, which included measures such as, decarbonization and that focus. So that, yeah, including solar was definitely an eligible part of that program.
Excellent. And I'm assuming that batteries are also an eligible measure in the grant?
I believe when paired with solar in certain circumstances, and then as Andrea mentioned, we'll have announcements. So you'll have, a certain number of case studies to see what exactly was funded later today. And I encourage you to stay tuned because that does really show the breadth of things that were able to be funded, as well as some innovative models that other school districts could look to, including, I'll say, some elements of battery storage.
Excellent, thanks.
Okay, another question. If the solar is part of another broader renovation or energy efficiency project on a school, are we able to allocate the tax-exempt funding to non-solar related portions of our project?
No. Now, there are elements of your solar project that may not be directly solar PV, those are covered under the rules. But no, if you're doing an HVAC system, that can't be part of the basis of your solar project. Now, Mark Connolly has an interesting comment that kicked off a little thread of recommending a new roof and increased insulation and HVAC upgrades and so on. Clearly, energy efficiency, energy conservation is usually the cheapest way of saving energy and meeting your needs. Solar is on top of that. So all of us here are saying don't ignore efficiency. Don't get seduced by the sparkle of solar PV, but look at all of your energy in a comprehensive way. Clearly, if you're doing solar, you don't do solar on a roof that needs to be replaced pretty quickly because it's expensive to remove all the modules, do a new roof in 4 years, and then put the modules back. So part of the solar discussion on a roof will be, what's the condition of our roof? how close is it to the end of its useful life? Do we need to replace that before we put solar on top? If you're doing a new roof, then it's a no-brainer to say, what's the insulation levels under that roof? And instead of just the half-inch of foam that often gets put down on a flat roof, maybe we want to go to several inches of foam. Again, there's ways of analyzing the effectiveness and payback of insulation that ought to be part of that project. So everything is connected to everything else. And you, for your own sanity, just need to decide, what are the bounds of our energy project that we're able to address. One of the advantages of the GISA program is it does, it casts the net very broadly. So to come in just as a standalone solar project and nothing else is possible under GISA. Solar is an eligible energy conservation measure. But it's a little shortchanging yourself in terms of the full efficiency impacts. So if you've already done a lot of efficiency, then you're ready to take the next step with solar, is how I think about that. But clearly, as Mark admonishes us, don't just think about solar, think about the roof, think about the insulation under the roof and other things that are just very closely tied to the sanity or the wisdom of your solar project.
And let me just quickly add, I think, just to be clear, it is absolutely possible to use tax-exempt financing to finance not just solar, but also efficiency.
There are other investment tax credits, right?
Yeah. It's the question is that investment tax credit, does that investment tax credit apply to the basis that might include the energy efficiency? And that's where, obviously the answer is no. The ITC or the elective payment only applies to the solar, but you can absolutely, and we would absolutely recommend using tax-exempt financing, although it would reduce the size of that elective payment. We absolutely recommend using tax-exempt financing to do as much energy efficiency as possible. Just know that there will be, if you're using tax-exempt financing, it does have that effect on the size of that elective payment for the solar portion.
Thank you, Matthew. I was thinking my blinders were on about the solar investment tax credit, but you're right. IRA does a lot of adds muscle to other investment credits as well.
All right, well, we are just about at our time. I want to thank all of our speakers for their time as well as great answers. If folks do have additional questions, they can reach out to Liz Robinson. I'm going to put her email in the chat in a moment, and I will just hand it over to Liz to wrap us up.
Thanks so much, Lane. I did want to bring up just one thing, which is that we've talked about a lot of different avenues and a lot of different kinds of financing and grant support. And some of these have different timetables. So on the short end of the timetable is the low income adder. That DOE, the way I think about this is that DOE will open a competition that is probably going to occur this fall. And when that door opens, you have to be ready to submit a kind of pre-qualification. And that means you need to have a project somewhat defined. So you need to know how large your system's going to be and various details. We don't yet have the form, so we don't know exactly what DOE is going to require, but in all likelihood, it'll be similar to the pre-application for the IRS tax credit. So it's very important for you, if you want to go after that 10% adder, to be ready this fall. On the slower end is the Green Bank or the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. That funding may not hit the streets for another 18 months or so. So these funding streams have different timetables. And one of the things I would just really encourage you to do is start now, get a project defined, get your project organized, get it defined. There are many different approvals that you'll need to go through. And there's a lot of, as Roger has said, there's a lot of consideration that you have to do. So that all takes time. So, good luck. Be in touch with us. If we can help you, we will. And we're thrilled to know that DOE's got fabulous technical assistance available as well for schools. And we will provide a smooth handoff between this project and your next step. So great to meet all of you. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. And thanks to all of the wonderful presenters. You guys have been awesome, and have a sunny day, as they say.
Thanks very much.
Thanks all. Liz, do you want to just jump to your contact slide while folks head out?
Sure.
And just as folks are leaving,
I'm
as a
sorry.
reminder,
Sorry, I went the wrong way.
no worries. The presentation will be sent out this afternoon and the recording will go out the following week.
Oh, we don't have my contacts on here. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'll just send it in the chat again.
Okay, great.
So I did see a couple questions just come through a moment ago. If folks, one seemed like it was directed towards Roger. So Paul Spiegel, if you wanted to just come off mute and ask your question, if you have a moment to stay on, please feel free. But if not, I'm sure you could send an email.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out if you have a project that has energy efficiency and solar as part of it, and you're financing it, let's say 50-50 tax exempt bonds and some other more traditional funding mechanism, do you have to eliminate, do you have to use the, I'm trying to think how to say this, because you're using tax exempt financing, you lose some of the elective payment. So you don't get the full 30%, I guess you get like 10% or 6%, whichever one it is. But would you lose that elective payment for 50% of the cost of your solar, or could you separate the financing and try to finance the solar separately from the energy efficiency so that you can get the full elective payment on the solar portion?
I would say that's the approach you want to take. Every loan will have a uses section in the loan document that says this is what is being paid for. And so you need to break that out so that your tax exempt bond financing says this is for energy efficiency measures X, Y, and Z. And your private financing would need to break out its uses to say this is for the solar project and all of these costs. As long as you do that, then it's clear that the tax exempt is going to the efficiency, and the taxable financing that gives you that 30% credit amount is going for the solar.
Okay, that's great, because we have a client that needs about $1.5 million in financing for the solar, but about 15 million for the financing of the energy efficiency measures to go to geothermal. And we were worried that they would lose that, lose some of that elective payment, which is really important to them to show that financially that's a viable project.
Yeah, no, every loan agreement will say what the uses are. Just make sure that they specify and don't blend it together into kind of a blended way. But the one is for the solar project, the other is for the energy efficiency. It's all in the wording of the loan documents.
Great, thanks for that.
Sure.
Great job today.
Thanks.
Any other final questions? Lane, could you save the chat? I didn't get a chance to review that. So if you can save the chat, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely.
All right. Any other final questions? If not, we will say goodbye. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Thanks, Lane.